On Wednesday, a shooter opened fire through the windows of a Minneapolis Catholic church during morning mass. 2 children, ages 8 and 10, were killed. 17 others, 14 children and 3 elderly parishioners, were wounded in what the Minneapolis chief of police called an absolutely incomprehensible act of violence. The killer was a 23-year-old male who identified as a female and took his own life on the scene. Joining me now with his unique perspective on what we know so far is security expert and former NYPD detective, Patrick Brosnan. Patrick, thank you for being here. According to reports, the shooter, Robert Westman, changed his name to Robin in 2020 with his mother's approval. This incident certainly echoes the 2023 Nashville shooting at that Christian school that killed 7. Again, the shooter was transgender, and the target was a Christian institution. Your thoughts, Patrick, on the parallels, and obviously mental illness is involved here, but is this another case of indulging mental illness? I mean, even he wrote he didn't feel like a woman and knew he wasn't one.
I'll be very frank. As a detective for many years and as the owner of a security company, national company, I got to say, I really don't have any greater compelling understanding or need to understand how the transgender plays into this barbaric, savage, absolutely Neanderthal shooting that occurred yesterday with these children at the church. It was absolutely horrific. And the reality is this guy, Raymond, was a bit of a ghost. He was a phantom. He was not on any radar. He was unremarkable in all aspects. He had no criminal record. He had no mental health issues. He had no complaints from the community. He bought the guns legally. This guy is a phantom. And I hate to say it, and it pains me deeply to say this, but this mass shooting, very similar 30 days ago on Park Avenue at 345 Park, was completely unpreventable.
Really?
The speed.
But surely,
yes, and it kills
surely
me.
there were signs, Patrick, that the family saw. People, I mean, you do have a guy wearing braids and coming out. I mean, you know, he clearly something was off here. There was an internal alienation or conflict in this person.
I don't doubt that. I mean, and the facts are beginning to support that as the data and intel and information does trickle in. But the reality is he had no history of mental health. He had no history of mental health direct problems, and he was not on the radar. And it's interesting because there's a lot of discussion right now that, well, if folks had known, he could have been under surveillance and then he went operational. This is a fallacy. That's a fable. We saw it with the Boston Marathon, with the Tsarnaev brothers. They were under sustained surveillance, the older brother, the boxer, for 15 months. This is an event that occurred. And the planning and the warning signs, Raymond, the danger signs were trapped in his sick mind. And since he didn't publicly, to our knowledge, right, share it with anyone, it was unknown. It was a secret. And that secret didn't allow any mitigation. There was no way to mitigate this. And by the way, mathematics was in his corner. Mathematics, he was very close. I looked at the parking lot grid. I looked at it over. I took a look. He got from that car in about 11 seconds, almost identical to 345 Park Avenue. 11 seconds.
Amazing.
Think about it. Who could stop him? It's terrible.
Well, we're learning
it's horrific.
more and more about this. You know, he didn't give any really advance notice, but he did release this so-called manifesto on YouTube. But that was, I believe, the day of the shooting. And there we see his drawings of the church. He was a graduate of the school. Photos of his equipment with messages like, "Where is your God?" "Kill Donald Trump," numerous supposed grievances. Patrick, the question is, what do you make of the nature of those messages in hindsight? And talk about the planning that obviously went into this attack. He knew these grounds.
So the message is in hindsight, Raymond. Yes, they're informing because investigators are always going to want to establish motive. They want to understand how to prepare and mitigate and diminish the probability of a reoccurrence, right? Through pragmatic overview. So you're going to want to know that. But the reality, from what I understand from published facts, is that release of those drawings and those hate rantings and videos were to coincide with the mass shooting. That's my understanding. I believe that is accurate. But again, the fact that they were timed to coincide, this manifesto, this last letter, and I read it, again, made him a complete ghost to the law enforcement authorities because he wasn't on any radar. No one, granted, you mentioned his family would know things. Well, that's family. They didn't share it.
Yeah.
This guy was able to get out of his car, Raymond, strut with the 3 weapons, about 11 or 12 seconds to those stained glass windows, and unleash holy hell on little boys and girls who were reading. It shatters your heart, who were praying in this church. And the reality is, and it destroys me to say it, there was no preventing it, there was no escaping it, unless, and it's statistically improbable that there was an off-duty retired guy who was armed or an armed civilian who could engage him that quick and terminate him and take him out of his misery. What are the odds?
Patrick.
Not good.
Yeah. Westman indulged in dialogues with Satan in this manifesto. He was also a cannabis user. He worked at a dispensary. Should the drug use be a focus in this case? I mean, we do know from, I had brain specialists on my podcast last week, Dr. Daniel Lehman, and he said it can lead to psychosis, particularly in the young.
Well, it's interesting. I only learned recently, by default, that the marijuana today is about 100 times more devastating in the impact on cognitive function and other functions. I just learned that recently. So my answer is yes, it would certainly be contributory in fleshing out what we'll call the story. And the story is, Raymond, we want to know who his kindergarten teacher was and what her maiden name. And we want to know up to and including what he had for breakfast yesterday and everything in between. How was he influenced? What were the influences? Who did he speak to? Who may share complicity relative to having intelligence that they didn't share? And is that a crime in the state of Minneapolis? So that's the whole idea of the investigation, right? There's always an ocean, a tsunami of data, intel, and information to be parsed through. And that's a big element to your point. Absolutely.
You talked about preventing tragedies like this in the future. The Daily Wire is reporting that 2 years ago, Tim Bentz, the president of Mindependent, which is a group of independent schools, and Jason Atkins, who's the executive director of the Minnesota Catholic Conference, wrote a letter to the governor, Tim Walz, stressing an urgent and critical need in Minnesota to make sure the schools are safe and secure in light of the recent and continuing attacks. Jason Atkins, the Minnesota Catholic Conference head, said that Governor Walz did nothing. Your reaction, Patrick, and what's the answer here?
So I'm going to try, and Raymond, this is a heavy lift, to stay totally objective. Walz is clueless. No fan here. But the reality is, as the owner for 30 years of a national security company who has provided security at over 3,000 locations, armed and otherwise, across 500 cities, I know about this. I wrote with my teams mitigating policies for 75 synagogues in the greater Philly area with the same direction, the same intent, and the same concern of how to mitigate an attack. The sad reality, again, kills me to share it, is it's impossible. There's so many schools, so many synagogues, so many churches, and when are no one ever believes, and these were clients of mine. We had endless conversations. They never know, are they going to be the super unlucky one? The chances 1 in millions that this kind of thing would occur, this horrific act would occur. And it's not just a needle in a haystack, it's a needle in a pile of needles, given the context overall nationally, the number of buildings. So what do? Well, in a perfect situation, it could never happen, both economically and pragmatically in terms of human beings available to perform that function, would be to have armed personnel, right? Put a guy with a gun,
I was going to ask
seize the guy with the gun.
Is that what we need? Do we need armed guards at every church? I mean, should we have retired? There's certainly a lot of Catholic, ex-cops, ex-military. Certainly, you could have a volunteer squad that would stand at every church, but is that where we're headed? Is that what's needed now?
We could be headed that way, and we have had discussions. We have had a lot of client meetings regarding that because we have had at Brosnan, at the security company, we have deployed armed personnel, sometimes 2, sometimes 4, during services from synagogues to churches and other houses of worship. Absolutely. Wow. And could you do it with a volunteer force? You could, provided they were trained and armed and licensed and compliant with federal and state mandates. Right. But the reality is, there's so many buildings, Raymond. There's hundreds of thousands I mean, there's only 600,000 law enforcement personnel who would even be available to. I did the math one time with Hannity because we were trying to look at options with what we call safe rooms, but they actually are interlocking series of doors if someone were to
Right.
come in and you lock them in. It's called a man trap, right? But this guy
Right.
shot through the stained glass window, same way as the guy in Sandy Hook did. Because we went up there, we tried to look at stuff back and when it occurred. The reality is, this type of lightning fast, unplanned, random, by an unremarkable person who's not under surveillance, who's committed and merciless. When he got to that window, he unleashed holy hell. He opened fire, 100 rounds, unpreventable. Unpreventable.
Yeah, Patrick, Pope Leo XIV was among many who expressed sadness, solidarity with the victims, saying he was profoundly saddened by this attack. FBI Director Kash Patel posted on X that the FBI is investigating this shooting as an act of domestic terrorism and hate crime targeting Catholics. Now, according to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, at least 250 incidents of vandalism, arson, property damage targeting Catholic churches and institutions have occurred across 42 states and D.C. since May of 2020. Why are we seeing this kind of hate and grievance-fueled attack, particularly targeting Catholic institutions, Patrick?
Again, and this is a bit speculative, okay? But the facts that I know, and I'm relatively cognizant of them because of the business, is that these individuals, like this person, this trans person who committed this horrific act, they get these vile, vitriolic threads of hatred, whether it's for the church, as we saw, there was something for Donald Trump, there was others, I read it, I saw, and the reality is it festers in their sick mind, and unfortunately, they generally do not share it with another human being who could perhaps see something, say something, and we can mitigate and intercede. And that's the horror show, particularly in this instance, and the same at 345 Park Avenue. So it festers, it builds, and then they go operational. And there's no rhyme or reason to it. There's no rhyme, there's no special date. It's not, like 9/11, you're doing it because of some reason, or Christmas morning, or St. Patrick's Day, the high holy day. There's no specific significance to the date of August 27th, relevant and relative to his rantings and ravings, from what I can see anyhow. So very, very, very big lift to try to identify, first detect, identify, and then to mitigate. Super tricky.
Yeah, and then the church, I think, looms large. They see it. It's a part of their past in the case of this guy. And like your Park Avenue shooter, who was convinced he had been an NFL player. I mean, these are loners who are just, turning this stuff over in their minds, and it's insanity. But it takes on a larger reality for them, which shows the power of thinking, a thought, repeated and ruminated on long enough. It creates its own reality.
I could not agree more, Raymond. The fact is, this knucklehead up at 345 Park Avenue, and I went down to the crime scene the next morning, and I walked it, and I taped it with a tape measure, and it was 11 seconds and 28 feet. And I did it deliberately to see how long it took from his parked vehicle, the BMW, to get to the doors, because we had provided protection at that building a few years back. So, I agree. These seeds, they germinate in the heads of these twisted individuals. And that's where the warning signs and the danger signs are trapped. They don't share it. It's all contained within their head, and it becomes gigantic. By the end, it goes from a sapling, in my view, to a redwood. And then they go operational, and it's just no rhyme or reason. There's no prediction element to it. There's no predictive element to it from what I can see and what I read and what I've experienced. And that's exactly right. It ruminates, it festers, and boom. They're you know what they are? They're nuts. They're nuts. There's a nuttiness to it.
Brosnan.
I mean, think about it. It's nuttiness.
Well, Patrick, I thank you for your time, for your insight. We will stay in touch with you in the days ahead. Thank you.
Absolutely. My pleasure. All the best.
Thank you so much.